March 1944. In war-ravaged Italy, hundreds of desperate civilians climb aboard a freight train on a forbidden night journey, believing the greatest threat is Allied bombs or enemy patrols. Yet within hours, over 500 will be dead, without a single crash or shot fired. How did a train, traveling exactly as planned, become the deadliest silent killer in railway history? The answer begins with Italy's hunger and a poison no one could see or escape. In 1944, the Italian peninsula was split in two. In the north, Mussolini clung to power with German support, while the south answered to the monarchy and Allied command. Between these fractured regimes, war tore the country apart. Allied bombers pounded cities from above. German troops scorched the land as they retreated north. In Naples and beyond, the daily reality was hunger. Grain, meat, and even bread vanished from markets, as every scrap of food and fuel was seized for the front lines. For ordinary people, ration cards promised little. Children lined up for hours, sometimes for nothing more than a cup of watery soup. Public transport, once a lifeline between city and countryside, was now reserved for soldiers and war material. Civilian trains were canceled or commandeered, and the few that ran carried only those with official permission. The authorities saw the railways as a tool of war, not a service for the desperate. With each passing month, the gap between those with access and those left behind grew wider. In this world of shortages, the rules of peacetime no longer applied. People risked arrest, or worse, just to find food for their families. The hunger in the cities became a quiet emergency, ignored by officials who had other battles to fight. Night after night, freight yards became gathering points for the hungry and the desperate. With no tickets and no schedules, people slipped between wagons, carrying sacks of coffee and cartons of cigarettes, goods traded from Allied soldiers or scavenged from bombed-out depots. These were not luxuries, but currency. In the countryside, farmers would swap a handful of eggs or a wedge of cheese for a pouch of American tobacco. For city dwellers, this barter meant the difference between hunger and survival. The authorities watched from a distance. Technically, every stowaway broke the law, but the rules of war had twisted what was forbidden into something quietly tolerated. If the black market trains kept city streets calm and bellies a little less empty, officials looked the other way. On the Naples to Potenza line, the flow of illegal passengers grew so predictable that station guards sometimes waved them through, choosing peace over paperwork. No one kept lists of names. Each journey blurred into the next, a tide of men and women risking arrest for a chance to bring home bread or butter. The trains themselves became lifelines, moving markets on steel rails, where strangers huddled in the dark, united by need and the hope that tomorrow would bring something to eat. The Naples to Potenza route, busiest of all, carried hundreds each week into the hills, chasing the promise of food beyond the city's hunger. Coal drove the engines that threaded through southern Italy's mountains, but by 1944, the best fuel was gone. Wartime priorities sent high-grade coal to the front, leaving railway crews with a gritty substitute, dusty lumps mixed with pitch and tar, scavenged from Yugoslav mines, and rationed with little care for safety. This low-grade coal burned dirty, choking the air with thick, invisible gases. Carbon monoxide, colorless and without odor, crept from every firebox, impossible to sense until it was too late. No warning bells rang in the stations. The chemistry was simple. Poor coal meant incomplete combustion, and incomplete combustion meant poison. The danger was not theoretical. On February 8, 1944, engineer Vincenzo Abate died in the Barrigiano Tito tunnel, less than 50 kilometers from Balvano. He left the cab to seek cleaner air, collapsed on the gangway, and was crushed between locomotive and tender, killed not by enemy fire, but by the gas his own engine produced. His death was logged as a misfortune, not a warning. No new orders went out, no changes were made. The war machine kept moving, and with every train, the risk grew. In the cramped tunnels of the Apennines, a stalled engine could turn the air itself into a silent killer. For the passengers and crew of train 8017, the firebox was not just a source of power, it was a loaded gun, cocked and waiting. Train 8017 rolled out of Naples on the afternoon of March 2, 1944, its 45 freight wagons stretching down the tracks like a lifeline for the desperate. Officially, the cars carried wood for war-damaged bridges, but by the time the train reached Battipaglia, the empty spaces had filled with bodies, men and women pressed shoulder to shoulder, clutching sacks of coffee, cartons of cigarettes, and whatever hope they could carry. At Battipaglia, the electric engine was replaced by 2 steam locomotives, both fueled with coarse, low-grade coal that promised more smoke than strength. More passengers clambered aboard, ignoring warnings, swelling the numbers to nearly 700. The night was thick with fog and rain as the overloaded train began its climb into the Apennines. The cold seeped into every wagon. Wheels slipped against wet rails, and the engines strained with each slow meter. By midnight, the train crawled forward at only 15 kilometers per hour, every wagon groaning under the weight. The countryside outside was silent, but inside, the wagon's hundreds of riders huddled in the dark, trusting that the train would carry them through the mountains to the promise of food and survival. Ahead, the black mouth of the Armi tunnel waited, its entrance barely visible in the mist and darkness. At 12:50 a.m., train 8017 entered the Armi tunnel, its 1.8-kilometer length swallowing nearly every wagon. The tunnel had a 1.3% grade that forced the locomotives to strain against the weight. 45 wagons, hundreds of passengers, wet rails, and the drag of low-grade coal. Another train's exhaust lingered, thickening the air with invisible poison. The engine slowed to a crawl, then stopped. Steam hissed in the darkness. The crew in the front locomotive tried desperately to reverse, hoping to back the train out. But the men at the rear, unable to see or hear what was happening ahead, mistook the movement for a slip on the rails. Instinctively, they applied the brakes, locking the train in place. There was no way to signal between engines. Carbon monoxide crept silently through the cars, undetectable and deadly. The front crew slumped over their controls, overcome before they could shout a warning. In the wagons behind, most passengers slept, never stirring as the gas replaced the air. Some awoke, confused and gasping, only to collapse within minutes. A handful tried to escape on foot, but the tunnel offered no mercy. By dawn, the Armi tunnel was a tomb. Nearly all inside lost before anyone outside knew what had happened. Michele Polo, the brakeman at the rear of train 8017, recognized the silence for what it was. At around 5:10 in the morning, after hours spent stumbling through darkness and rain, he reached Balvano Ricciliano station. His arrival brought the first warning of disaster, but by then, the tunnel had become a tomb. When a rescue train finally set out, it could not advance. The tracks leading into the Armi tunnel were blocked by bodies, men and women who had tried to escape on foot, only to collapse before reaching daylight. Clearing the way took hours. By the time the wagons were hauled from the tunnel, hope had vanished. The official death toll stood at 517, but local accounts and later research suggest the true number reached 626. Only 235 victims were ever identified. The rest, hundreds of fathers, Mothers, sons, and daughters were buried in 4 mass graves at Balvano Cemetery. There were no ceremonies, no names on stone. Wartime censorship kept the tragedy out of the headlines. Italian officials blamed the coal, the Allies blamed chaos, and no one was held to account. The dead were written off as casualties of war, their families left with silence and questions that would never be answered. Today, mass transit remains a lifeline for millions, yet even now, safety often bends to necessity. The Balvano tragedy warns that invisible dangers and silent victims do not vanish in war or peace. If we ignore those lessons, the cost will never truly stay buried. Thanks for watching.